Hello, and welcome to the conversation on modulations. This is a conversation we'll begin here at the end of our term, but that if you continue on to study theory, you'll actually explore it in more depth in future courses. For our purposes, we'll discuss modulation to closely related keys, especially by use of a pivot chord. And I think it's important to recognize that this conversation is really an extension of work we've already begun in terms of looking at secondary functioning chords, secondary dominants, secondary leading tones. Those really operated within a single key, while of course modulating now allows us to explore key regions beyond the original. So again, we'll explore modulations using pivot chords to closely related keys, and of course it bears some discussion about what we mean by closely related keys. One really nice thing about our text is that it gives us a variety of ways to identify closely related keys, one of which being discussing that closely related keys encompass the major and minor keys within one key signature, either way of our starting key. And for me, the easiest way to visualize that is to simply, refer to the circle of fifths. And this is an example of the circle of fifths as it appears in our text on page 12. And so kind of this is where I go to figure out what are my closely related keys, okay? So let's say that I'm starting in the key of, let's just say, C minor, right? And I want to figure out everything or all five keys that are closely related to it. Well, really, if I kind of think of the circle of fifths as being in wedges, right, for each key signature, I can look at anything within one wedge of my starting point, right? So all of these keys would qualify as closely relating. That includes B flat major, E flat major, which of course is the relative of C minor, A flat major, also F minor, and G minor. So if I'm going to modulate to a closely related keys, any of those will do. Similarly, if I start in, let's say, D major, then my closely related keys include everything, within one wedge or within one key signature of D major. So that would include G major, A major, F sharp minor, obviously the relative of D major, B minor, and E minor. So this is a nice way of using the circle of fifths itself to quickly identify our closely related keys. If I'm analyzing a piece of music that follows kind of the standard harmonic practices that we've been studying over the course of this term, especially if I'm looking at pieces maybe from the Baroque or the Classic era or the Romantic era, certainly the early to mid-Romantic, one of the things I may want to do is kind of keep in mind the kinds of keys that are potentially going to be used or modulated to within whichever piece or whichever movement I'm working in. And the book kind of discusses this a little bit. The book explains that when you're beginning in a major key, there's a very high likelihood that at some point there's going to be a modulation to the dominant of that key. So if I start in the key of C major, there's a very good chance that the composer is going to take some time and modulate and or spend a good amount of time in G major, so the dominant of that. Alternatively, if my starting key is a minor key, then there's a very good chance that we'll modulate and or spend a good amount of time in the relative major. So if I start in F minor, there's a good chance it will have some modulations and maybe even some changes of keys into A flat major. So with some of that basic groundwork covered in terms of actually knowing what we mean by closely related keys, that's going to help us as we move forward as we look at now analyzing pieces that include modulations, and then also being able to write modulations using pivot chords ourselves, again, to closely related keys.